workshop on speech democratic engagement and the open internet. I'm Stuart Benjamin. This is actually my first day here as the Distinguished Scholar in Residence. And this is the first of 3 workshops that are going to be examining the significance of the internet's openness for different interests relevant to the open internet proceeding. So this one is obviously on speech and democratic engagement. There'll also be one on innovation and investment. And then finally, there will be one on consumers and transparency. After that, the Commission will then use information gathered from these workshops and other sources to then have 3 more workshops that will look more specifically at how rules might be drafted. So this is the beginning of a fairly long process. But the true beginning of this event is statements. We have actually 3 commissioners here, Commissioners Copps, McDowell, and Clyburn. So we'll begin with statements from them in that order. So Commissioner, none of these commissioners needs any introduction, I assume, so Commissioner Copps, please take it away.
Thank you, and welcome to Stuart and your first day at the FCC. This is actually my first minute at the FCC today because Mignon and I just got back from Memphis a couple of minutes ago, and we were out there for a hearing on digital inclusion last night, which went very well and gave us a lot of the good kind of information we want as we set about doing a broadband plan. I am very happy to see everybody here on the workshop for speech democracy and the open internet. This dialogue is part of a really open and transparent process that Chairman Janikowski has put in place, probably the most open, transparent, and extensive process that I have seen in my going on 9 years at the FCC now, and I think the Commission is on the move. I supported Chairman Janikowski's decision to move forward with a notice of proposed rulemaking on open internet principles and to add 2 more to the 4 internet principles that we adopted in 2005 and to make all 6 of them rules of the Commission. Those actions taken together, 2005 and 2009, I think are sober, clear-eyed recognition that the internet must never be about powerful gatekeepers, never be about walled gardens. It must always be about the smoothest flow of communications among people. Such speech should not be stifled. We have confronted similar tensions before between the concerns of network operators and the interests of citizens in communicating freely. For as long as this Commission has existed, entrenched powerful network operators have argued that harm will inevitably result from pro-consumer decisions. In the 1950s and 60s, the government was told that the entire phone network would be crashing down and compromised if innovations like Hushaphone and Cartophone were attached to the end of the telephone line. In the early 1980s, the Department of Justice was told that breaking up Ma Bell would leave the United States literally unable to respond to a nuclear threat. In recent years, we were told that forcing telecom carriers to accept enforceable network neutrality rules would jeopardize their financial future as they were consolidating. And in 2007, we were told that wireless carriers couldn't make an open access model work until these very same carriers then changed their mind and came out in favor of such a model. I recount this brief history just to remind you that we need to proceed thoughtfully and with a healthy dose of skepticism. As we work to deliver a worthy national broadband plan, I'm excited about the potential of broadband for the citizens of this country. Broadband intersects with just about every great challenge confronting our nation. And that's really the interesting part. I think that this exercise that Julius has started here is finally starting to permeate the country. People understand we're not just a bunch of broadband geeks talking technical language at the FCC, but that this goes to every significant challenge facing the United States of America today, whether it's the creation of jobs, expanding educational opportunity, health care, energy dependence, the degradation of the environment, opening the doors of equal opportunity. None of those challenges can be solved unless a component of the solution is broadband. In other words, broadband is pertinent to the resolution of every single national challenge facing the United States of America, and every one of our citizens must have access to this enabling technology to participate fully, meaningfully, productively in American life. The genius of the internet is its openness and its dynamism and its availability to one and all, and that's why I have believed for a long time that the FCC needs to play a proactive role in preserving the internet as a vibrant place for democratic values, innovation, and economic growth. A solid democracy in the future is going to depend on broad pipes, good private sector vision, and thoughtful public policy to make sure that everyone has access to the information infrastructure they need to exercise their citizen rights and responsibilities. History teaches us that if a special interest has the technical capacity and the financial incentive to interfere, there are going to be some bad apples who are going to try. That's why we are moving to network neutrality. Given what's at stake, we need hard and fast rules, not just idyllic principles and an honesty system arrangement to keep them from doing so. There are founded and unfounded fears in this debate, to be sure, and we need to have all the facts while considering the future ramifications for this powerful tool. I don't believe that the importance of our open internet proceeding can be overstated. It's about safeguarding America's broadband users, wherever they are and however they choose to access the internet. So with that in mind, those are my thoughts as we go into thinking about network neutrality. One more thought before I give the platform to my colleagues. There's another dimension. It's a related dimension, but just we need to build, I think, a little bit on where we are right now, and that's what I want to emphasize today. Broadband, we've already seen, has so many effects on various aspects of our life. This other dimension we have failed to talk enough about is really what broadband can do, not just for our economy and our competitiveness, but for citizen engagement, for our democratic dialogue, for the civic give and take we need to underpin our democracy. So broadband is more than just technology, again, more than just something that you can quantify in terms of jobs and other things like that. It goes to this intangible heart of what democracy is all about. So this is what I want to see us emphasize in our broadband plan. And I don't think we can come up with a roadmap for what's the media of the 21st century going to look like in the next 64 days, but I want our broadband plan to evidence an understanding that civic engagement and these intangible values that I talked about go to the heart and soul of that plan, and if it's going to be a viable plan, it has to address them, and I want that broadband plan to demonstrate that we have a commitment here at the FCC to do that. And I think we do. I'm delighted with the folks the chairman has brought to the commission. I know Steve Wallman's going to be working on media, and Stewart and a lot of other people here. So this is good, but it's also something that can't wait. You know, this broadband and the implications of this infrastructure for our democracy goes back to what we're trying to do goes back to the beginning of the country. I'm reminded of Thomas Jefferson, and you all remember that famous quote that he had about whether he would prefer a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, and we all know that he ended up saying, well, newspapers without government. But our folks at Friends of Free Press, with their usual diligence, dug up the rest of Thomas Jefferson's quote. It's a fascinating thing, because right after he said what I just said, he said, "But I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them. But I should mean that every man should receive those papers and be capable of reading them." Isn't that something? He's talking about deployment, getting newspapers, which was the information infrastructure of his time, out to every American, out ubiquitously. And he's talking about adoption, people knowing how to read, people having access to those newspapers through enlightened public policy, like postal subsidies. So, you know, the technology may be new. Some of the jargon we're going to be using in this debate is new, but the challenge is as old as our country, and it's a democratic challenge, and it's always with us. It was with us in Jefferson's time, it's with us now, and 50 years when we've got some new whiz-bang technology that nobody can even think of, we'll be trying to think, how do you fit that in to the heart and soul and to the fabric of our country. So I am grateful that you are all here. I'm grateful you're talking about this, and I'm looking forward to your comments.
Commissioner McDowell.
Thank you, Stuart. And Commissioner Copps, it's great to hear you quoting Thomas Jefferson. I want to hear more of that. That's great. Great Virginian. And pretty soon, not only that, not only that, but I'm going to try to make you a Blue Devils fan too. So, and on that note, Stuart, it's great to have you here. I've gotten to know Stuart Benjamin a little bit over the years. He comes to us from my alma mater, Duke University, and so it's terrific to continue this tradition of Duke lending us some of their distinguished professors. Of course, we've had two chief economists in the past couple of years as well, one from the Fuqua School and the other from the undergrad school as well, Michelle Connolly, who came back twice as chief economist. But in any case, welcome, and you've already started making controversies, which is fantastic. You weren't even on the job yet when you became controversial here at the FCC, so that's a sign of great progress, and keep pushing the envelope and stimulating the debate, and I look forward to working with you going forward. And I'm also pleased to be joining this distinguished panel of diverse views that we have here today, and not the least of whom are my distinguished colleagues, Mike Copps and Mignon Clyburn. But I really want to thank the panelists in particular for taking the time to prepare their thoughtful comments about their experiences and their perspectives. And we'll be hearing today about many innovative uses of the internet to broadly disseminate information, share viewpoints, and organize citizens to participate in the political process, whether at the local, regional, or national level, and from any and all political philosophies. And I actually had this written down. This was already in my remarks, but you just repeated it as well. But as you said last week and just 5 seconds ago, you hailed the genius of the internet for its openness, its dynamism, its availability to one and all, and I certainly agree with that sentiment. In fact, I think it's safe to say that we all agree that the freedom of expression made possible by the internet is stirring, even a bit stunning if you're old enough to remember life before the net, as I am. Nowhere is this truer than in the context of political speech, the fundamental lifeblood of our democracy. Now, political speech takes many different forms, from candidates giving speeches and running broadcast ads to concerned citizens coalescing around a cause and organizing themselves through the internet. The number of voices and perspectives accessible on the net are literally uncountable. At no time in American history have our fellow citizens had more communications power at their fingertips. Yet the political component of the internet success story rests to some degree on choices made by communications policymakers over the 15 years since the net was privatized. At that historic moment, policymakers decided on a bipartisan basis to allow the internet to grow largely unfettered by government mandates. They chose to rely instead on a cooperative model of decision-making and self-governance by a large number of interested parties, private and public, working together in collaborative forums, associations, and other non-governmental bodies. That model gave birth to the most innovative and adaptive communications tool that the world has known, and the fastest penetrating technology human beings have ever created. So while I'm pleased that we will gain a deeper understanding today of the internet's effect on our national civic life, it is also appropriate to discuss the legal and policy implications of any potential expansion of the government's role in regulating this medium of expression. It probably comes as no surprise that I have some serious concerns from both a constitutional and policy standpoint about placing more regulatory mandates on the internet. My legal review begins, as always, with the wording of the constitutional or statutory provisions at issue. The plain language of the First Amendment, of course, is a check on government power to burden speech, and not on a private party's choice to speak or stay silent. Efforts to advance First Amendment values through additional government regulation risks turning over 200 years of First Amendment jurisprudence on its head. As a result, New rules likely will receive heightened scrutiny from reviewing courts and, based on past precedent, would seem particularly vulnerable when the regulated entities operate in a competitive environment that leave open other avenues for disseminating speech. In addition to constitutional considerations, however, I have some plain old practical worries, one of which is the real prospect of the government getting new regulation wrong, no matter how well-intentioned its actions might be. The risks of getting it wrong are high in a fast-evolving arena like the realm of the internet, where consumer demands and business plans evolve on a near daily basis, if not hourly. And the consequences of getting it wrong are much more significant when it is the government that misjudges a changing marketplace, rather than a private sector player competing against other and possibly savvier business rivals. When a company guesses wrong and builds a business model that fails, the failure hurts the company's employees and investors, but rarely does that failure impair a competitive marketplace because consumers have the power to choose among other options. When the government guesses wrong, however, and imposes a regulatory regime based on unsubstantiated fears about the future, it can distort the development and deployment of new services by all providers for years to come. In short, what is frequently considered to be market failure is really the result of regulatory failure. Until such harmful policies become reversed, consumers lose out. Concerns about well-meaning government misjudgment are not limited to my side of the political aisle. I recently ran across a quip from the economist John Kenneth Galbraith, a man who wasn't shy about advocating for federal intervention on occasion. Yet frustration with one government agency prompted even Galbraith to say, quote, "You will find that the State Department is the kind of organization which, though it does big things badly, does small things badly too," end quote. As proud as I am of the FCC and its people, I don't think we are smarter than the collective wisdom of the millions of Americans or billions of people worldwide who comprise the private sector. Producing ineffective regulation is one thing, but issuing harmful regulation would be, of course, irresponsible. The latter would be especially troubling when the service or product at issue concerns speech, including efforts that would burden one party's ability to speak in order to advance the speech of others. Sometimes the effect of the government's past failed efforts in this area is mostly an economic one. Consider the time and resources wasted in the 1990s on regulatory constructs such as the FCC's video dial tone rulemaking and its statutory successor known as Open Video Systems, or OVS. Both were designed to bring new, competing multi-channel video services into being on telephone networks. Video dial tone would have inserted one independent multi-channel provider onto the telco platform, but barred the network operator from having any control over the content. OVS, on the other hand, would allow telcos to offer their own and slightly deregulated multi-channel programming service, but only if they reserved 2/3 of their system capacity for one or more independent multi-channel providers. Neither regulatory scheme delivered any appreciable new service options to consumers. For those few companies who tried to make the concepts work, how many resources were diverted away from productive uses that would have responded to actual consumer demand? Other failed government efforts have imposed a more insidious burden by potentially depriving consumers of the ability to receive speech that they might highly value. One example in this regard is the Commission's old Primetime Access Rule, or PTAR. That restraint, first imposed in 1970, effectively barred the 3 TV broadcast networks, and yes, for the young folks listening, at one point there were only 3 TV channels. But it barred them from supplying programming to affiliated stations for the first 30 minutes of the most heavily viewed evening hours. The idea was that the freed up time would give rise to a wealth of new and better programming, more specifically targeted at local viewers' needs and desires. And what new and improved programming did the government's rule produce? A lot of syndicated game shows. The law of unintended consequences prevailed once again. The FCC finally gave up on that rule in the mid-1990s when it became clear that the broadcast network bottleneck, as it was known back then, that argument was no longer credible in light of competition provided by cable and other sources. So some say that it's too early to judge the constitutional and policy implications of any net neutrality regulations on speech. I think the better approach is to start considering the potential ramifications now in an effort to avoid repeating old mistakes. But in the spirit of the First Amendment, let the debate begin. So thank you to all of you for coming here today and for this chance to speak with you, and I look forward to reviewing the byproduct of this panel today. Thank you.
Commissioner Clyburn. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
All right. No. It is my pleasure to introduce the Right Honorable Gentle Lady from South Carolina, the former chair of the Public Service Commission of the Palmetto State, the Honorable Mignon Clyburn.
Thank you, Commissioner. He's just getting me back for something something I did in the past. So I'd like to thank my colleagues. Welcome, Stuart, to the FCC. It's going to be a lot of fun for you. It's already starting out that way, I hear. Good afternoon, everyone. I believe there's no better way to begin the Commission's workshop for our open Internet proceeding than with a focus on the Internet's role in enabling speech, journalism, culture, and democracy. The Internet has had an incredible impact on each of these elements, and our role is to preserve and enhance those things that enable greater democratic participation and a better informed citizenry. One of the core reasons we've begun this proceeding is to ensure that the Internet remains an unbiased platform where all speakers, including historically underrepresented voices, can reach all audiences on the same footing and with extremely low barriers to entry. This is an incredible development. As many of you know, for years I owned and operated a weekly newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina, where I learned firsthand the challenges that face individuals and small businesses trying to compete in the traditional media marketplace. These challenges were particularly acute in light of the difficulty of competing against media outlets with established distribution networks. Today, thanks to an open Internet, a community newspaper like the Coastal Times or a budding journalist essentially has the same distribution network as the Washington Post or, dare I say it, the Memphis Commercial Appeal. I just got back this morning. Just think about what this opportunity affords all Americans. I guess I should say all connected Americans, but that is another topic for another day. The Internet's openness is also particularly important for those minority voices, which have traditionally encountered a whole host of barriers to reaching audiences through traditional media. How long have we wrangled with the problem of minority media ownership? This struggle is in large part due to the difficulty it would be for minority media owners to have meaningful access to their target audiences. And while that struggle is important and ongoing, and is likely to continue for some time, when it comes to the Internet, the opportunity is here and now. That is, as long as the Internet remains an open platform. The open Internet is fundamentally different than how broadcast TV or radio and cable television have developed historically. There are no gatekeepers on the open Internet that determine who gets to speak and what they get to speak about. If anything, it is a unique opportunity for the First Amendment to truly flourish. We have here with us today an impressive and diverse group of panelists who have come together today from across the country, including I see from West Virginia, California, Tennessee, and yes, South Carolina, to share their personal experiences with the open Internet. I am looking forward to our panelists' presentations on how the Internet's openness has affected their ability to do the important work they do, whether in journalism, political organizing, or cultural creation. Our open internet proceeding has just begun, and we will begin discussing these issues. We will be discussing these issues for some time, but today's workshop will be an essential part of the foundation for our future work. Thanks to the staff for their terrific work, and to the panelists for traveling here today, and for those of you joining us here and online for taking the time to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Commissioners Copps, McDowell, and Clyburn. Just as a reminder, again, this is the first of 3 workshops that are going to be focusing on issues related to the open internet. And just by way of background, the idea is that these workshops are going to be part of the information gathering process for the Commission in devising the approach that it has toward the open internet. And Chairman Janikowski and the Commissioners are really committed to this as a data-driven and fact-based process. So what do we mean by that? In this, as in any debate, you can start with preconceived notions and let those guide you. But the Commissioners think that that's a mistake. Of course, people have different perspectives, but that's no excuse for blinders. Of course, the questions relevant to the open internet have different policy implications, and your policy orientation will influence that. But you should start with the data. You should start with the facts and have the facts and the data really drive the process. That's the idea behind this workshop and the other workshops and other information gathering that the Commission will be engaged in. So this is the beginning of a process. It's one that will develop over time, where we're going to be trying to get information into the Commission, the best information we can, and have that really drive things. Now, the question for today is, what are the effects of the internet's openness on speech, civic participation, democratic engagement, journalism, and cultural creativity? So the panelists are going to talk about the relationship between the internet's openness and democratic speech and participation, including its impact on things like citizen journalism, as well as blogging, political organizing, and cultural expression, discussing the costs and the benefits of the internet's historic openness. The panelists are also going to discuss how the internet differs from other communications media as a platform for their uses. Each panelist is going to talk for 5 minutes. Our clock, I think, is working, so I won't have to give you the hook, but if I give you this sign, that means that you've not been paying attention and the time has run out. Those of you in the audience, if you have questions, Zach, right there, will have index cards. Please write down questions on index cards and you can pass them forward. Those of you on the web, you can email any questions to newmedia@fcc.gov. Those of you in the audience, you could also email your questions if your handwriting is really terrible. And then I will aggregate those questions and I will put them to the panelists as time permits. The hope is, with only 5 minutes per panelist, we'll actually have some time for some back and forth. So, with that, let me introduce the first speaker to my immediate left, Michelle Combs? Combs. I've already met her and I've already forgotten. She began her role in politics as an early age when she became the state chair of the South Carolina Young Republicans, and under the guidance of the late Lee Atwater, a fellow South Carolinian, Commissioner Clyburn will want to know, who was the campaign manager for George H.W. Bush and former RNC chair. She managed to take the chapter to one of the best of the country and was elected as Young Republican of the Year in 1989. She was then chosen to head up America 2000, Educational Service Corp in the early 1990s. She brought together corporations and children from all over the state and raised thousands of dollars to better the education system in the state. She also produced corporate and political events all over the country. And then in 2002, she became the director of special projects for the Christian Coalition of America. And in 2003, she became the director of communication. And over the years, she's worked for Republicans on the local, state, and national levels. And without any further ado, Michelle.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners and staff members of the FCC. Thank you for inviting my organization to participate at this important workshop. Use of the Internet has allowed the Christian Coalition to amplify the voices of millions of hardworking, pro-family Americans in a way that has revolutionized their ability to be heard and to engage in the political process. The Christian Coalition is excited about its ability to use the Internet to reach millions of our members worldwide. Today, our members can follow the Christian Coalition through Twitter tweets, Facebook updates, YouTube messages, frequent daily blog posts, and our email blast. And users can use Dig to bookmark our content to friends. Last year, during the presidential election, thousands of churches were able to download our presidential and congressional voter guides. In the last 2 cycles, we've distributed over 100 million voter guides. The Internet has made these distributions easy and inexpensive. As you can see, increasingly, our members are using the Internet for social media tools to connect with the Christian Coalition. In fact, right now, our homepage features a link for our Twitter users to engage in the healthcare debate in Congress. On this page, we encourage our members to do 5 things that only the Internet allows us to do. Sign an online petition, tweet a link to our Action Center, tweet a message to their members of Congress, tweet messages to their healthcare friends about this debate, and tweet our Christian Coalition homepage to their friends. Our webpage also links to our YouTube, where the Christian Coalition maintains a Christian Coalition channel where our members can watch and listen to discussions about policy debates we are involved in. And increasingly, our site incorporates embedded videos, which makes our site more informative and user-friendly. The mobile world enables the Christian Coalition to reach our members directly without a big media filter, on a real-time basis through text messaging and tweets. This is extremely important to help our members engage in the political process, especially when there is a time-sensitive vote that is happening in Congress and state legislature. For example, in 2005, an amendment was introduced in the Bankruptcy Reform Act that would deny bankruptcy protection to those who protest at abortion clinics. Once we became aware of this amendment, we immediately sent out hundreds of thousands of emails to our online members, describing the amendment and encouraging them to contact their representatives immediately. Through the open Internet, we were able to quickly and effectively communicate information pertinent to our 3 million members, and they in turn were able to swiftly relay their opinions to those who represent them in Congress. Thanks in part to our active members, we were able to successfully defeat this amendment. The Christian Coalition's use of the Internet is to help us and our members engage in the political process, is why we believe that preserving and protecting an open Internet is so important. We believe that organizations such as the Christian Coalition should be able to continue to use the Internet to communicate with our members worldwide. Without a phone or cable company snooping in our communication and deciding whether to allow particular communication to proceed, slow it down, block it, or offer to speed it up only if the author pays to be on the fast lane. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we have seen network operators block political speech, block content, and block the most popular applications on the Internet. As you know, one cable company was discovered to have blocked consumers' ability to the King James Bible. Unfortunately, however, vendors of deep packet inspection technology are today actively marketing to allow network operators to inspect the content of my communications and decide whether to slow down or block the speech, or perhaps put my speech on the fast lane if my organization pays the broadband provider an additional tax to have access to their fast lane that connects to the Internet. I'm concerned about this level of invasion into the privacy of the members of my organization and its burden on our freedom and association and speech. If you care about grassroots democracy, I respectfully suggest it ought to concern you as well. A nonprofit family organization like the Christian Coalition depends on an open internet to allow us to compete against big media companies and deep-pocketed political organizations to reach our members and allow our members to contact their representatives. The open internet levels the playing field for organizations like ours, and we have seen how the internet has allowed the Christian Coalition to amplify its voice to be heard on important policy debates. The Christian Coalition does not seek burdensome regulations. We generally believe that less government is better than more government. However, we support a free market of ideas and commerce on the internet. However, at this time, we need very limited rules of the road to protect the new public cyber square. Any threat to the ability of organizations and groups to reach the American public at a very low cost without permission is simply unacceptable and strikes at the heart of citizen participation and well-functioned democracy in the 21st century. Consequently, we support the chairman's proposal to codify some basic lightweight rules that would preserve the qualities that have made the internet the most market-driven tool for communication, speech, and innovation ever invented. Increasingly, faith-based groups are turning to the internet to promote their political rights and to engage in what Ronald Reagan called the hard work of freedom. The on-ramps to activism must be kept open and accessible for citizen activists across the political spectrum so we can continue to do that work in our time.
Thank you very much. I think we have next Glenn Reynolds. Glenn, are you there? While we're booting up Glenn, he is the excellently named Beauchamp Brogan Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Tennessee College of Law, where he teaches constitutional law, administrative law, and internet law. He's a graduate of Yale Law School, where he was a founder of the Yale Law and Technology Association, and he writes regularly for Popular Mechanics, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Examiner, Forbes, and many other publications. He's probably best known for his blog at instapundit.com, and also has a regular show on pjtv.com. He previously blogged for Fox News and MSNBC. Glenn, we can see you, so take it away. Uh-oh. Wait, hold on. Hold that thought. We're not getting your audio. Can you try talking now? We seem to be experiencing technical difficulties. We will go on, Glenn, with your indulgence, we will go on to Jonathan Moore and come back to you. All right. So, Jonathan Moore, our next speaker is yes, no jokes here about the fact this is a Federal Communications Commission. Or maybe you can just insert your own joke. It's too easy. All right. Jonathan Moore is the founder and CEO of Rowdy Orbit IPTV, LLC, located in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Rowdy Orbit is an online platform and destination featuring professionally produced web series for a highly underrepresented consumer base, African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American viewing audiences. Before starting Rowdy Orbit, Jonathan Moore was a 16-year seasoned advertising creative executive who developed successful general and multicultural executions for Fortune 500 clients such as the dearly departed Pontiac, McDonald's, the Prudential, Novartis, U.S. Army, Seagram's, Partnership for a Drug-Free America, Sony Music, Mazda, Missouri Division of Tourism, and Burger King. And before I hand it over, I should tell you all, because I'm not doing this well myself, you should talk right into the mic so that they get the audio very well.
Okay. I want to thank the FCC for inviting me to speak today about network neutrality and free speech. It's truly an honor. My name is Jonathan Moore. My company is called Rowdy Orbit. It's a company I started out of frustration over the lack of representation of people of color in traditional media. But the failure of media companies to provide and produce programming for and about people of color made me realize there was an opportunity for me to create a successful platform to truly showcase culturally relevant web shows. But how? I can't afford a broadcasting license, and I couldn't own a cable channel. So the only way to create and deliver a solid platform was the internet. And that's why I'm such a strong supporter of network neutrality. So my story is, a few years ago, I moved to West Virginia to launch my own business, Rowdy Orbit. What is Rowdy Orbit? Rowdy Orbit is an online platform featuring professionally produced original programming specifically to and for the African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Native American viewing audiences, featuring, hosting, and developing great storytelling that would be shelved by the traditional process. Some examples of, we have a show called Chick, and it's all about an African American female superhero trying to find the secret academy. We also have Ilse. She would go into that. We also have Kindred. It's 3 African American women who talk about love, drama, and with their whole entire family in the backdrop of New York City. What makes them unique, they have one pretty skinny woman, and the other 2 women are plus-size women. And we feel as though that would have never made it to network television. And there's also Chef Melvin, who's also a cook who didn't make it to the Food Network channel because of his exuberant personality. Rowdy Orbit is a clear alternative platform, as you can see. A conduit to prove your passion and idea has merit. An unobstructed direct line to an underserved viewing audience. A launching pad springboard for quality multicultural programming. Each and every web series of Rowdy Orbit has a goal: either stay independent or gain the necessary buzz, momentum, and business metrics for a company to acquire their intellectual property. This represents the perfect platform for web series creators to create value, build an audience, grow their business, in some cases, live out their American dream. We simply enable web series creators to take a direct action, grow without added weighted restrictions, and express with freedom to delivery quality creative product without subjective roadblocks or process barriers that are not touched by traditional media. At Rowdy Orbit, we're opening doors, connecting creators with opportunities, creating a viable space for great ideas and content to devise silos and stereotypes. This is all possible because the internet provides the access to inexpensive online tools to streamline operations, control costs, all while connecting with like-minded individuals across the country. Most importantly, the internet has allowed me to innovate despite running a bootstrap operations. It has allowed me to develop a competitive advantage by delivering quality and relevant programming to a visibly underrepresented audience. People of color are able to go online and use the internet to tell the stories without first getting the approval from an executive that's culturally removed and doesn't value or understand the needs of our community. Radio wouldn't be possible without an open internet. Without network neutrality, for example, since I started developing the business plan, and as of today, December 15th, my initial out-of-pocket investment has been $526. That's correct, $526. The modern example of the basic business story. When an immigrant comes to the country, comes to the United States, they only have a few dollars in their pocket. You're looking at one of the prime examples, and Rowdy Orbit is a direct result. Low-cost opportunity, plus minority ownership, plus hard work, total a thriving alternative platform that celebrates the freedom of expression via a quality creative product.
Thanks very much. Now I think we do have Glenn Reynolds. Glenn, are you there? Let's try again for the one more.
I'm here.
Great. Glenn, take it away.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm glad this is finally working. Still a few bugs in the system, I guess. Well, someone earlier said we're not just a bunch of internet geeks here, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I actually am a broadband geek, and my involvement in this stuff has been pretty much from the level of a hobbyist. Before I started blogging, I ran a record label, it's still sort of alive, and produced a number of bands and marketed them mostly through the late limited mp3.com, ran a series of internet radio stations, and did a lot of stuff like that, also with a zero to low initial investment, and had a lot of fun, sold some records, met people around the world, some of whom I'm still in touch with, and found it a great creative outlet for me, and it was for quite a lot of other people. I started blogging in 2001. I teach internet law, and I sort of try to do various hands-on things on the internet so that I can stay grounded and with a real world cred. I went to blogger.com. I followed the instructions to set up my blog, which took me about 15 minutes. I started blogging on August 8th of 2001, and I thought, well, if it goes well, I might have a few hundred high-quality readers of academics and journalists I know and stuff like that. And actually, I remember at the end of August, I got up to 600 page views a day, and I really thought I was getting somewhere. Now I've got between 400,000 and 500,000 page views a day. It's all done over the internet at effectively no cost for me. And it has reached people all around the world and gets me email and introduces me to all kinds of smart people who do all kinds of interesting things, many of them not traditional smart people jobs. And I found it tremendous. It's also served as a platform for a lot of people doing journalism. My blog is called Instapundit, and most of what I do is basically links and punditry. I occasionally do hard news coverage if I happen to be somewhere where it's happening, and I have readers who are correspondents in the classic sense. They correspond with me. I've had people who report from Afghanistan and from Iraq and other places via my blog from time to time. Other people have really turned blogging into a much more serious journalistic model. Michael Yon, for example, who's currently in Afghanistan as an embedded journalist, has spent probably more time in Iraq and Afghanistan than any other journalist as an embed, and funded entirely by donations from his readers who read his blog at michaelyon-online.com. He writes like a 21st century Ernie Pyle. He takes great photos. He's a Special Forces veteran himself, so he's got a lot of experience. And he also actually makes more money this way than he would probably as a correspondent for a major news outlet, assuming major news outlets could afford to have correspondents these days. Michael Totten is another one, michaeltotten.com, who does a similar sort of reporting from a lot of the world's hot spots, Lebanon, Iraq, all over. And there are quite a few other bloggers doing this sort of thing. Probably disproportionately, they've been military bloggers, because it turns out there are a fair number of people with military experience, or at least experience getting around the world's hot spots, who had interesting things to say and felt that it was undercovered for the last few years. Beyond that, we have people who report news just because they happen to be there when it happens. And this happens via blogs. It happens particularly now via Twitter. And now that you have video cameras and digital cameras and cell phones and all integrated, and you can stream video to the web from your iPhone and things like that, we get much more on-the-spot reportage as news happens. And even though traditional news organizations are really strange for resources, there's one group of people who are always going to be on the scene when news happens, and that's the people who are already on the scene when news happens. And traditional news organizations are beginning to incorporate them to some degree as well, as a way of just increasing their reach and getting firsthand fast response coverage of things, take advantage of what's already out there. Beyond this, we're also seeing huge numbers of people who are expressing themselves through political satire and such on things like YouTube. Some of those people go on to have bigger TV careers. Alfonso Rachel, who started out on YouTube, is now on Pajamas TV and sometimes finds himself in other places. Ditto a guy named Steve Crowder. And all of this is made possible simply because the internet's cheap. If you want to produce video and send it around the world on the internet, you need an inexpensive camera and an inexpensive computer and an inexpensive internet connection, and some place to host it, like YouTube or Motionbox or whatever. In the old days, you had to have satellite trucks and stuff like that. In fact, I covered the Knoxville Tea Party protest for Pajamas TV. I used a MacBook Pro with a pretty good video camera connected to it by FireWire, and my Verizon EVDO broadband card to send stuff live to the Pajamas TV studio in LA over the internet. And as I walked past all the $1 million satellite trucks from the broadcast people, one of the guys looked at me and said, "You're really making us obsolete, aren't you?" And I was like, "Well, maybe a little bit, yeah." Why can you do this? Because the barriers are low. The equipment is cheap. The service is cheap. Once you're on the internet, everybody is equal. And that, I guess, really brings us to the point of today's presentation. I mean, my first experience of that, and probably really my inspiration for blogging, was when Mickey Kaus started his blog. And I followed a link from Slate.com, which was sort of one of the early big deal online magazines. And I followed the link to Mickey Kouse's site, which was something run by one guy on his own little server, and it looked just as good. And I realized that from the standpoint of the reader, it was seamless. The internet's just all one big place. There aren't the prestige addresses in the same sense there are on the television dial or the cable selector or anything like that. And it really opens things up to let people communicate in all sorts of ways and to draw audiences based on their ability to appeal to people. And I think that's a wonderful thing on a couple of levels. I mean, for guys like me, the internet's just a big playground. I'm a geek. I have fun with it. I have a lot of hobbies, and it gives me a way to do things. For the society at large, it brings a lot of voices into the conversation that have previously been excluded for a whole lot of different reasons. And I think that's terrific, too. And I certainly am in favor of efforts to keep the internet a level playing field. Though, as I mentioned in my prepared statement, I have certain concerns regarding the ability of regulators to really keep up with technological and economic change. With that, I will bring my statement to an end. Thank you so much for having me on this somewhat buggy connection, and I hope it's worked out.
Great, thanks very much. You actually just ended at the point I was going to ask you, so that was like telekinesis. All right, our next person is Ruth Livier, an actress, writer, producer who was recently featured on the cover of Written By, which is the Writers Guild of America magazine, as the first person to join the Writers Union for her work in new media. She has an award-winning dramedy, is it Ilse? Ilse. I'm sorry, I blew that. Now in its second season, and she also has a web series, Osiris, in development. She's had a long career in many other roles, going everywhere from Playhouse's Disney to Arlen, Texas, for those of you who are King of the Hill fans. Without any further ado, Ruth.
Thank you. Online video is in its infancy. It was only in 2005, a mere 4 years ago, that a then unknown site called YouTube was launched, effectively beginning the online video revolution that has transformed the internet from an information and communications tool to an entertainment destination. The internet is quickly becoming a new avenue for independent content, diverse content, and minority small business ownership. By nearly all accounts, online video has one of the fastest consumer adoption rates among any form of media distribution. For example, in March 2009, Nielsen's reported 9.6 billion videos streamed by 130 million web users in the month. As this chart illustrates, in the course of 1 year, growth of online video has continued to rise dramatically. During this period, Nielsen estimates that online video usage in the United States has grown by 24%. Advertisers have also begun to flock to online video, spending $587 million in online video advertising in 2008. While this figure is tiny compared to the billions spent on television advertising, online video remains one area of advertising growth even in this economic downturn. While the major media companies have taken to the internet by allowing users to legally watch content ranging from classics such as The Dick Van Dyke Show to the latest episodes of your favorite shows, what is largely unavailable through their extensive libraries is a wider range of diverse, culturally relevant programming keeping pace with the changing face of America. The U.S. Census Bureau's report of 2007 affirmed that the minority population in the United States climbed to 100.7 million people, or 33.6% of the total population, meaning that 1 in 3 persons in the United States is a minority. And yet, the most recent NAACP report found that minority communities are still not adequately represented on broadcast television relative to their numbers. Now, this lack of balanced and equitable representation translates into fewer job opportunities for minorities, fewer opportunities to make a living as a writer, director, or as an executive in our business, and consequently, less access to lend our voices to entertainment content that is created. For minority content creators, the low barriers to entry on the internet have allowed us to take initiative, create, produce, and distribute our stories, and develop a financially viable business. But my ability and the ability of many other new media content creators is dependent upon my ability to reach an audience unimpeded and unencumbered by gatekeepers and filters. This ability to prove our market has very strong socioeconomic repercussions for our communities. As an American and as a Latina, I got tired of seeing a disproportionate amount of negative stereotypes in traditional media. As a creative, new media empowered me. I saw in the web an opportunity in whatever small way to partake in redefining those unfair and unbalanced perceptions. The only requirement was that an audience be able to find these little 6-minute webisodes that I was writing. I wanted to tell a story that was more in line with the vast majority of the 47 million Latinos who are contributing positively to our communities, rather than the oftentimes biased portrayals of mainstream media. Just last week, the Pew Research Center's Project for Excellence in Journalism issued a report chastising the media's portrayal of Latino Americans. My show, Ilse, is a bicultural dramedy about a modern American Latina, someone with big dreams fighting through other people's low expectations, juggling career, a not-so-successful love life, and a family who sometimes doesn't understand her progressive American ways. There's no way I could have gotten my show done in traditional media. I was quickly dissuaded from trying many times. With no precedent for such programming and a custom of producing content that can be resold in other, most notably European countries, European markets, I wasn't surprised to hear the skepticism I encountered. Now, we started production 2 years ago on the show, and we are effectively now finding an audience, our fan base. As you can see by the fan quotes, it reaches beyond a target niche market. It is even broader than I could have imagined. Our numbers have multiplied. Season 1, we had a few thousand. Season 2, now we are closing in on 500,000, halfway through Season 2. And we achieved all of this with zero marketing dollars. My startup production company has been able to tell a relevant American story because the internet allows us the unique opportunity to compete for the hearts, eyes, and minds with billion-dollar media conglomerates of today. Our success is based on the popularity, the strength of our content, our audience's ability to find us, and the sweat of equity of an amazing, talented team of creative people. The Writers Guild of America West represents nearly 8,000 writers of television, film, and new media. Being the first person to join the WGA because of my work on the web shows that the web can nurture new voices, give us an opportunity to perfect our craft, and be added to the mix of professional writers and producers, effectively diversifying the talent pool. As a small business owner, I hope to create jobs and open opportunities for others. Allowing ISPs to construct barriers to entry or to offer uncompetitive advantages to those with the deepest pockets will only serve to derail the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit that have driven the internet since the beginning. It was the same freedom that allowed innovators to create the web in the first place. As the inventor of the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, stated, "When I invented the web, I didn't have to ask anyone's permission. I didn't have to ask anyone's permission to create Ilse. I was able to work hard, pull together the talent, and launch a successful web series." An open internet drives innovation and encourages the independent American entrepreneurial spirit. Failure to maintain the open internet will mean we are repeating the mistakes of our own past. The financial interest and syndication rules were designed to protect the ability for independent voices to be heard. Repealing them has had detrimental effects. It opened the door to media consolidation in traditional media, which allowed a mere handful of companies to dominate the entertainment industry and shape the news and information that gets to the American public and the world. Until the internet, a viable distribution alternative to traditional media has never existed. A neutral, non-discriminatory internet is a market-driven, equal playing field for all Americans, regardless of ethnicity or socioeconomic standing. It allows viewers to find the information and entertainment they want without filters or gatekeepers. It is critical to the vitality of the American public discourse and our democracy. A neutral internet is our best opportunity for diverse voices to partake in the molding of the American perception and perspective. Thank you.
Thanks. Our next speaker is Garland Gilchrist, who is the Director of New Media at the Center for Community Change, which advocates for public policies in the interests of low-income people, particularly low-income people of color. In 2005, he co-founded and contributes to the Super Spade Black Thought at the Highest Level, one of the nation's leading black political blogs. He also co-founded BlackNet Action, a strategic collective of black bloggers and online activists who coordinate online campaigns across the country. Take it away.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, FCC commissioners and staff, for inviting me to testify here at this very important hearing. I'd like to tell a personal story about my own personal evolution as an activist, as an organizer, and how that connects to the open internet and the things that it enables Americans to do, and how it enables people to participate in the democratic process. I'm an engineer by training, and as a young person growing up in the city of Detroit and later in its suburbs, I witnessed firsthand the fallibility, the challenges, and the promises of a city and of a state that is really dependent on a single flavor of manufacturing. The challenges living in this place really opened my eyes to what's visible, what's possible, and what's promising about open networks and about the open internet. So I always wanted to pursue my own passion for technology that developed when I was a young person as a pathway for empowerment and a way to inspire others to take collective action, to build stronger communities, and to finally realize the American dream as it is most relevant to them. So as I came of age, I sought for ways to connect that passion for technology to how to improve the lives of others. When I worked at General Motors as an intern, I found ways to do this professionally. I helped contribute to, create, and then manage 2 websites that I think really set the table for my own activism. One was called webhands.org, which was an initiative that was created as an internet portal to connect volunteers and donors to local nonprofits in their own geographic locations. This is a way for sort of these small advocacy organizations to really reach out to donors that may have been accessible to them or may have been inaccessible or invisible to them. And this is the type of thing that the open internet enables because it allows people to reach audiences that they never even knew existed. Another was called patentdonors.org, which enabled small businesses and institutions of higher learning, big and small, to research and donate their unused patents and intellectual property to small businesses and investors who were interested in taking advantage of that technology. So these were very important ways for these institutions to take advantage of the web, take advantage of its low barriers to entry, take advantage of its environment to increase competition and increase participation in order to really be competitive. So these projects really opened my eyes to the use of open networks as a tool for encouraging participation, encouraging empowerment, and social change. And building on this foundation, as a student, community organizer, and political organizer, I've been armed with the technology, infused with passion, and inspired by a metaphor of open gates that I think applies very well to the open internet. Openness is a defining characteristic of democracy. Openness means available, visible, and flexible, sort of like an open gate. If the gate is open, anyone can walk through it and enjoy what's on the other side. Now, I'd like to make a reference to Commissioner Clyburn, who also agrees that the question of who can access these open networks is an important but a separate question. And it's not the focus of today's discussion, but I do want to at least highlight that as an important thing that I hope that the Commission will seek to address. So in the context of political engagement, open gates really is a metaphor that has presented itself repeatedly throughout history. Walled gardens and gated cities have characterized the kingdoms of ancient history in the same way that they characterize our current media and technical landscapes. We need to make sure that we design regulations thoughtfully, deliberately, and appropriately to ensure that openness is always protected no matter what the situation is. So the characteristics of openness, the characteristics of flexibility, transparency, and disruptive potential are what's made the internet so empowering. Individuals can communicate with strangers, friends, and family without hindrance. This flexibility leads to the freedom from fear of retribution for those communications, and that freedom inevitably leads to political change. So I can illustrate this point using a few examples from my own experience that involve video, authentic storytelling, as well as how marginalized people are organizing online to take advantage of open networks to impact the political process. One I'd like to talk about is who's known as the Tea Party rapper. So this year there's been a movement building among disenchanted people with the current president, the current Congress, and their policies, and they've organized marches and demonstrations in various parts of the country. Well, one individual wanted to really tell his story about what his opinions were about how policy was being designed through video. Well, through a site like YouTube, he produced a music video independently or with money out of his own pocket with very small investment, with no marketing budget or anything. He produced a rap video that was viewed by hundreds of thousands of individuals that really incited not only a level of frustration, but a level of inspiration for people that agreed with his movement. He was able to reach people all across the country and even all across the world with his message. This is something that would have never been possible before the advent of the internet before the advent of a communications platform that was so open, so accessible, and so inexpensive. Another example is voter mobilization. During the final weeks of the 2008 presidential campaign, advocacy groups really turned their attention to making sure that as many people got to the polls to vote as possible. Well, through the open internet, they were able to find ways to make their advocacy stronger, backed up by academic research. So there was a Yale political science research paper called Social Pressure and Voter Turnout that was published in February 2008. Its authors included Alan S. Gerber and Donald P. Green, and they discovered that direct mailings informing people that their neighbors, friends, and family would find out whether or not they voted actually had an impact of increasing voter turnout by at least 5%. So the liberal group MoveOn.org decided to take this research that was available to them via the open platform of the internet, via universities that could share their knowledge and understanding with the rest of the world for no cost. They were able to use this to influence their activism. So they created a video series where they actually had an interactive video where people could insert another person's name into a video that said, hey, it was a fake newscast. It said, your candidate lost the election because you didn't vote. And they would have their name in it and everything. Very interactive. That video was shared and viewed over 21 million times. And that video, backed up by the strong science and the strong evidence that was available to these folks because of the open internet, really impacted voter turnout in a very positive way. So the web is uniquely suited to tell authentic stories. I'd like to tell one last example of this from my own organization, the Center for Community Change. This past summer, as we've been debating healthcare reform legislation in this country, our group thought it was important to make sure that all American stories were heard. And so we went out to different state, county, and country fairs in rural states across America, Nebraska, Tennessee, Maine, and Missouri, and we asked people about their experience with their current healthcare coverage, the current healthcare system. We connected these people online to be able to tell their stories visually and in written form. And finally, we shared those stories with people all across the country, including members of Congress and their staff. We hosted a briefing on the Hill where we allowed these folks to come and tell their stories. And these real stories that were viewed hundreds of thousands of times really had an impact and helped make sure that the voices of rural America were heard in this debate. This is something that, again, never would have been possible without open networks. So I want to just be clear in saying that I am in firm support of open networks being protected and being supported and being encouraged. Thank you.
Thanks. Next, we have Robert Korn Revere. Bob is a partner at the law firm Davis Wright Tremaine, has extensive experience in First Amendment law and communications, media and information technology law, counseling clients, writing in the area, serving as litigation counsel, speaking. He also successfully petitioned George Pataki for a posthumous pardon for Lenny Bruce, which I think is unique. I could be wrong. And his clients include A&E Television Networks, American Association of Advertising Agencies, Association of National Advertisers, CBS, Motion Picture Association of America, the National Association of Broadcasters, Viacom, and Playboy Enterprises. Without any further ado, Bob.
Well, Stuart, thanks for the introduction, and I'd like to thank the Commission for inviting me to participate in this important conversation on the Internet and free speech. At the outset, I just need to make clear that the views I'm expressing today are mine alone. They're not that of any client. I'm not here to represent anybody. And my observations are based on my experience as a student of the First Amendment, as a practitioner in the field of constitutional law, and as a former FCC staff member. I think all you have to do is listen to a panel like this, and you get a sense of how the Internet has transformed communications in America. These are really inspiring stories of how individuals have gained a greater ability to communicate and connect than any time ever before. Even the transmission of Glenn Reynolds from apparently the Apollo 13 spacecraft indicates how barriers have been lowered and more things are possible. And more connections can be made. But these revolutionary developments have also transformed the law, and specifically the way in which American courts view new technologies under the First Amendment. This has always been a rather uneasy relationship. From cinema to broadcasting and from cable television to satellites, courts were slow to recognize the application of traditional First Amendment principles to new media. Legislators and regulatory agencies treated different categories and created different categories and classifications for communications technologies. as each one emerged, and courts established different levels of constitutional protection based on those different categories. Some of us have always believed that this jurisprudential approach never made sense, but to whatever extent it once did, it is entirely untenable in the age of media convergence. In some cases, we've already been able to make some progress in extending First Amendment protections to media, while in other cases, as some of you may know, we're still working at it. But the Internet was revolutionary because it was the first new communications technology that courts found to be fully protected by the First Amendment from the outset. In Riddle versus ACLU, the Supreme Court could find no basis for qualifying the level of First Amendment protection or First Amendment scrutiny that should be applied to online communications because it found the new medium to be as diverse as human thought. As Judge Dalzell wrote in the district court opinion that led to the Supreme Court's ruling, the Internet is a never-ending worldwide conversation and the most participatory form of mass speech yet developed. On the strength of those findings, courts viewed content regulation as a threat to the open Internet, and they uniformly invalidated both the CDA and its successor statute, the Child Online Protection Act, as well as a number of state versions of essentially the same law. Now, ironically, the same Congress that adopted the CDA also declared that it was a national policy for the United States to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for Internet and other interactive computer services, unfettered by federal and state regulation. Now, that was a different part of the same statute, but one that recognized that these technologies had evolved because of a minimal regulatory view, and that those technologies grew up without regulation. Now, as technology is evolving at a rapidly increasing pace, the central question we face is whether an open Internet will better be preserved by the hands-off policies that led to its creation or by new regulations. The FCC in its network neutrality notice of proposed rulemaking cites a number of its prior policies that help to serve as building blocks for competitive telecommunications, including the Carter phone line of decisions and the Commission's computer inquiries. These are cited as precedent to support the idea that the government can act to keep the network open. But the FCC didn't invent the Internet any more than Al Gore did. These pre-World Wide Web decisions, and in some cases pre-Internet decisions, may have contributed to an increasingly competitive telecommunications sector, but they were not adopted with the Internet in mind. The difficulty, too, in looking to prior Commission policies is that it's not difficult to find counter policies that went the opposite way. For many years, the Cable Act and the MFJ prohibited AT&T and the telephone companies from getting into video services, something that wasn't changed until the 1996 Telecommunications Act. As Commissioner McDowell noted, the FCC's effort to create open platforms has been, how should we call this, an incomplete success. Both video dial tone and open video systems were regulatory constructs crafted by legislators and regulators with the goal of ensuring an open platform.
This is not a referendum on what you're saying. Does anybody have any idea what's going on? All right. No, the record will reflect he will add 30 seconds to his clock. Bob. No, keep on going.
Okay. Ultimately, as we debate the question of how to preserve an open Internet, we face two potentially competing risks. One, the risk that's been outlined by some suggesting that allowing the unregulated Internet to continue will risk adverse actions by various companies. The other, the risk that we will impose a level of government regulation on the Internet that court decisions so far have freed us from. The choice that people will make on those, in evaluating those two questions will be informed by whether they consider government to be a greater risk, as it has in the past, or whether or not they consider the potential for adverse action by corporations to be a greater risk. I've outlined my take on that in the written comments that I provided that go into some detail as to the reasons I reached the conclusions that I do. My conclusion is that there is a greater risk from inserting more government regulation over the Internet and bringing us back to the failed experiment with media regulation that we had in the 20th century.
Great, thanks. Next is Jack Balkin, the Knight Professor of Constitutional Law and the First Amendment at Yale Law School, the founder and director of Yale's Information Society Project, and the director of the Night Law and Media program at Yale. He's has a blog, Balkanization, also has written several books, including Processes of Constitutional Decision-Making and Cultural Software, A Theory of Ideology. His most latest book, co-edited with Reva Siegel, is The Constitution in 2020. Jack.
Thanks very much, Stuart, and I'd like to thank the Commission for inviting me to speak. I was asked to come and speak in my capacity as a First Amendment scholar to talk about why the open internet is crucial both to freedom of speech and to democracy. So I wanted to start by asking about really what the gifts are that the internet gives us, and start by talking about what digital networks make possible. First of all, they allow people to become active speakers and creators instead of merely passive consumers of information and entertainment. Secondly, they decentralize innovation. They give people abundant opportunities to create and use new applications for communication and creativity. And third, they allow people to form new kinds of social relationships, groups, and communities. In short, digital networks allow people to participate in culture, society, and politics in all kinds of new ways. They can do it individually or in groups. They can do it locally, nationwide, or around the world. The ability to participate is the Internet's great gift to mankind. Participation is also central to the First Amendment. Some scholars tell you that the point of the First Amendment is liberty. Other people say that it's democracy. I tend to combine the two. For me, the point of the First Amendment is to foster a democratic culture. That's a culture in which ordinary people have a say about the forces that shape them and make them who they are. A culture is democratic not because people vote on it, but because they get to participate in making it. A participatory and democratic culture requires more than just protecting political speech. It requires a vibrant public sphere that makes self-government possible. Participation, however, means very little if we need permission to participate. An open internet means that we can speak, organize, and innovate without getting anybody's prior permission. This idea, too, has deep roots in the values underlying the First Amendment. One of the earliest conceptions of freedom of speech was freedom from prior government restraints. And I'm sure you all know the saying that the real freedom of the press belongs to the person who owns one. Until recently, nobody could gain access to mass communications unless they had the permission of a large media company, like a newspaper or a television station. And even then, they only got access on the broadcaster's terms. They were often heavily edited, and good luck getting access if you said something a little oddball or unpopular. An open internet changes all this. People can reach audiences that only large media corporations could reach before. They can route around traditional media gatekeepers who often function like private censors. They can create new tools and applications for speaking, communicating, and organizing, all without having to get anybody's prior permission. Imagine a world in which you had to get permission from internet service providers before you could create a platform like TypePad or YouTube or upload content onto Flickr or Facebook. Free speech and democracy thrive precisely because we don't have to ask somebody's permission before we speak, before we engage in politics, before we upload files, or before we create a new social media application. An open internet is an internet that is open to new content and new applications. It's an internet where your ISP doesn't try to block you or shut you down for daring to compete with its favored content providers. The internet lets us route around the old gatekeepers. But the new gatekeepers are the broadband companies who own and operate the conduits through which everybody speaks. Broadband companies are private organizations. Their private interest is in making money and pleasing their shareholders. But their business is affected with a crucial public interest, promoting free expression and democratic participation, and giving ordinary people the opportunity to create, to innovate, to spread information, and organize politically. Broadband companies further the public interest when they operate as open, non-discriminatory platforms for other people's innovation and as open, non-discriminatory conduits for other people's speech. But their private interests inevitably lead them to play favorites. Their incentives mean that even if broadband companies have no plans to censor unpopular speech, they won't really want or enforce a level playing field for private speech and innovation. That's why there is inevitably a conflict between the public interest and private interests, and that is the reason why regulation is necessary. To preserve the great promise of the Internet, we must confront this conflict of interest head-on. When companies act as primary conduits for other people's speech, they should not be able to discriminate in content or applications, and they must be transparent about how they maintain and manage their networks to promote efficiency. That's the simple principle. Now, seeing that regulation is on the way, broadband companies have begun to argue that they have a constitutional right to block applications and discriminate against content, and that any attempt to keep them from maximizing their profits in this way violates the First Amendment. Nothing could be further from the truth, and I'll be happy to talk about this more during Q&A. But for right now, let me just explain that under the First Amendment, Congress can make both telephone and cable companies into common carriers who must take on all traffic. Congress can certainly require a much milder non-discrimination requirement like network neutrality. The thing to remember is this: the First Amendment protects speech. It does not protect business models. The FCC's job is to make sure that communications companies serve the public interest as well as their own private interest. This idea has been the basis of telephone and cable regulation for decades. The public interest demands that we secure the benefits of an open and participatory Internet for this country. Network neutrality rules are a good place to start.
Thanks. Finally, we have Andrew Schwartzman, President and CEO of the Media Access Project. He has directed the organization since June 1978. This is a public interest telecommunications law firm that represents the public interest in promoting First Amendment rights to speak and hear. He has written and spoken extensively, is well known, I think, to everybody in the FCC and everybody in Washington. Andrew.
Thank you very much. Much of my written statement is similar to and elaborates on some of the points that Professor Balkin made, and is responsive to some of the things that my friend Bob Korn-Revere had to say. I would simply emphasize that much of what the debate is about here is whose First Amendment is it? And I would argue that Internet service providers are not functioning as speakers when they are functioning as conduits of speech of others. Knowing that we're going to have all of these creators on this panel, I chose to focus on what is candidly a more negative kind of presentation today. In the latter half of the 19th century, the telegraph came into being, quickly became a monopoly under financier Jay Gould, leveraged to deal with the Associated Press to keep other telegraphy companies from being able to function, and indeed some people think that this monopoly manipulated the outcome of the 1876 presidential election in favor of Rutherford B. Hayes. Now, that was a long time ago. Analogies are limited, but there are some similarities, and one is that the best way to protect against such abuses involves erecting safeguards against them. Now, the problem is not speculative. Here's what I know. 4 years ago, TELUS, one of Canada's largest internet service providers, surreptitiously blocked customer access to a website operated by a union with which it was engaged in a labor management dispute. 700 other websites were collateral damage as a result of this blockage. They stopped it, but they continue to maintain they have the legal right to do so. A few months later, the communications carrier named Madison River adopted a practice of blocking voice over internet telephone calls placed by customers using its own DSL internet facilities, presumably as a competitive factor. They entered into a consent decree with the FCC to stop it, again, without admitting that there was any legal problem. 2 years ago, Verizon Wireless initially blocked text messages from NARAL. Verizon Wireless said that it does not accept issue-oriented, abortion, war, etc. programs, only basic general politician-related campaigns. It said that, for now, Verizon Wireless will not accept any programs that are issue-oriented. from any organization that seeks to promote an agenda or distribute content that, in its discretion, may be seen as controversial or unsavory to any of our users. They said general informational campaigns were acceptable except to the extent that the content involved is in Verizon's sole discretion, not issue-oriented or controversial in nature. Now, Verizon backed down, but it never issued written guidelines until August 2008, when it commendably issued very good guidelines. More recently, we had the Comcast BitTorrent controversy, in which the Commission found that Comcast was blocking, surreptitiously blocking peer-to-peer protocols. The complaint demonstrated, among other content, Comcast blocked transmission of a file containing the text of the King James Bible. Initially, Comcast denied that it was doing so, and after this was proven to be untrue, Comcast lied to the Commission, saying this blocking only took place at times of congestion. Months later, it was established that actually they were blocking at all times and had been doing so for several years. Now, that's what we know. More importantly, what we don't know is how many other instances of blockage or degradation of service there might have been and how many are taking place right now. After all, Comcast initially denied it was blocking BitTorrent. Only after it was confronted with conclusive evidence discovered by the accident that one of its customers was a highly experienced computer engineer who was puzzled by his inability to upload barbershop quartet music that was in the public domain, only then did it come to light. Determining when such misbehavior takes place will only become more difficult. Advancing technologies, including deep packet inspection, are much more sophisticated and much less easily detected than Comcast's blatant ham-handed exploits. The greatest dangers we face in maintaining free expression on the Internet arise because of what we do not know, and because of what new techniques may have been or may soon be developed. And it's in that context that I addressed the question in my written testimony of how to address the First Amendment to the network neutrality debate. Thank you.
So thanks very much to everyone. I have a couple of questions that I would like to throw out, and we can hopefully have some discussion among us. And again, people should feel free to give those questions to Zach or newmedia@fcc.gov. I think that's the right email address. If let me just start with a question from Michelle, Garland, and Glenn, if he still exists, which is, so there's Andrew just talked about this issue of blocking, and you've all said about how the internet has opened up avenues for you that cable doesn't open up, that broadcast doesn't have. There's this huge communicatory capacity of it. How and why is it realistic that they would actually try to block any of your messages? What's your fear of what would happen if the companies can freely block? What's the story you would tell as to how and why this would happen and how it would impact you? I don't know if you want to start, Michelle, and Garland, and we can throw it to Glenn.
I think Andrew mentioned it, the incident that happened with NARAL, even though we're on totally opposite ends of the political spectrum. We actually did an op-ed with Nancy Keegan on this issue, and we are very action-oriented. So once we get an issue out, we have to have it out immediately. I gave an example of how we stopped an amendment on a bill. So because we're so action-oriented, and if they stopped and blocked our content, then it would significantly hinder the way we communicate through our supporters.
So to speak to that very specifically, I think that the challenge is it is not clear where these certain gatekeepers, what their biases would be and what their opinions would be on different issues. And so as you have such a diverse group of interests organizing around all sorts of issues, it's really unclear as to how much they can or cannot trust those gatekeepers. And the best way to ensure that the discourse is as vibrant and as diverse as it can be is to eliminate those gatekeepers or prevent them from blocking that sort of content. The case for Comcast blocking BitTorrent is particularly interesting because activists, as we learn more about the internet and learn more about these tools and learn more about how to take advantage of the open internet, will want to take advantage of it in all sorts of ways, and that might mean sharing content that is of that very large content, which is really the issue in this BitTorrent case, where the argument was that congestion on the network was happening as a result of the sharing. Well, the reality is, as speech and as content and as the things that we create become more advanced, become more substantive, and become, frankly, just larger, we're going to need ways and pathways and avenues to share those. And so the sharing should not be hindered or should not be blocked or should not be encumbered by interests who organizers, activists, who citizens do not understand their biases and cannot trust.
Glenn, if you're there, do you want to say anything? Or have we lost you entirely?
No, I'm here. I am absolutely concerned with the notion of gatekeepers blocking content that they regard as controversial. This often plays out as ridiculous. Some of you may have heard Apple was blocking an iPhone app that turned public figures into bobbleheads because they said they wouldn't allow anything that ridicules public figures. Corporations in general tend to be very risk-averse, very control-oriented, and basically kind of dumb about stuff like this. And it's probably easiest to give them a hard and fast rule that says you don't get to do that. I want to, by the way, weigh in and say that I am inclined to agree with Jack on the First Amendment issue. You may have a First Amendment right to speak in terms of what you put on your Comcast or your Verizon website, but I don't think you have a First Amendment right to function as an editor with regard to the speech of your customers. The customers of an internet service provider are not akin to reporters in a newspaper or something like that, and I just don't think that First Amendment argument holds any water at all.
Great, that's a nice segue. I now wanted to ask Bob, Jack, and Andrew a related question on this point about blocking. Bob made a point in his opening statement. Yes, there were instances of blocking, and they were reversed. So, in fact, the NARAL text message, I've forgotten, within 48 hours, they had reversed their position and allowed it. So, given that in the past, Madison River, well, I guess the FCC smacked them down, but maybe there would have been a competitive pressure on them as well. So, if we think that, by and large, competitive pressures will at least diminish this danger, then why do we need open internet rules? If we think that the market will respond, and I'll let you, we can go down the panel. We can start with Bob and then Jack and then Andrew.
Okay, let me start with that, and I'll start with some of the examples that have been raised. First of all, I think listening to the stories of the other panelists and what they're capable of doing on the web provides sort of a powerful response to this. I mean, it shows what people are actually doing, and their story is replicated millions and billions of times around the country and around the globe. What you hear are a few isolated examples of where people have suggested there has been bad behavior. The drive for network neutrality rules accrues if you believe that the behavior will become a significant concern among a significant number of network operators, that it won't be disciplined by competition or by the adverse reaction of customers, and if where there's market power, more general laws like antitrust can't be brought to bear. Where it has occurred, it's been mainly through consumer pressure that has corrected the misbehavior right away. I think the real question that we face is the one that Commissioner McDowell identified at the outset, and that is, if one company makes a mistake or engages in bad behavior, that's one thing. But when the government does that or makes a mistake, it affects everybody. And as in the case of keeping the telcos out of electronic publishing, it takes decades to undo it. That raises a couple of related First Amendment issues, and not the ones that Jack started by talking about, whether or not people are free not to be common carriers. That actually is an interesting question, because there is some case law on that where restrictions were placed on telephone carriers on whether or not they could get into electronic publishing, and the development of that case law was cut short by passage of the 1996 Telecommunications Act. But I'd love to hear what precedents you have in mind when you say that anyone can be forced to be a common carrier. But there's a broader First Amendment issue, and that is, to what extent do you insert government regulation of broadband networks that is inevitably going to extend to other areas? Keep in mind, the government's agenda isn't just to keep an open internet. Even in the network neutrality proceeding, the FCC describes its mission as to preserve an open, safe, and secure Internet. And once regulatory jurisdiction is established, it then extends to other areas. The FCC is conducting an inquiry right now on whether or not it can regulate content and exert regulatory jurisdiction generally over all platforms, including the Internet, in the name of protecting children, and that would apply to all types of different content. There are other areas in which the FCC is looking to exert regulations, and those present First Amendment issues of a different order, and they're the kinds of things that I thought we were emerging from.
Jack?
There are several different points. I hope I can remember them all. First, you would get no consumer pushback if you didn't discover that there was something going on. And one of the things that these open internet rules are trying to do is promote transparency. So if you believe in competition and consumer pushback as a way to keep broadband providers honest, you shouldn't be opposed to transparency requirements. The second thing is that generally, the example of Comcast with BitTorrent is a wonderful example of what's going on. It's a kind of combination, I'm going to take up what Glenn said, it's a combination of not invented here, plus you might eat into our profits in the way we're imagining our business model. That is, the problem wasn't that Comcast was opposed to barbershop quartets or the King James Bible. Comcast thought, oh my God, here's a new application. We didn't invent it. We don't know how it works. It might, in fact, interfere with the ways we plan to make money through our favorite content providers. So let's cut it down. That is much more likely to be the way in which you get bad behavior in the future. And since with an open internet, you're always getting new kinds of applications. Nobody ever knew about BitTorrent, 5 years ago, right? You're going to get the same pattern repeated over and over again. And if you don't have transparency, then you won't be able to know what's happening until much later. So it's really important to create a baseline for fair competition now, saying that you have to adapt to new applications, not just shut them down. That's the real problem. The final point, I guess, that Bob asked me is, what's the source of the idea that you can be made into a common carrier? Well, Bob and I can't be made common carriers. We wouldn't be very good at it. On the other hand, that if you're a conduit for other people's speech, yes, you can. And a classic example of that is in Turner. Every single justice of the Supreme Court agreed that cable companies, which were traditionally treated like broadcasters, could have been turned into common carriers if Congress had chosen. Now, it's true. Sometimes there are 5-4 decisions, but when 9 justices take the same view of this, it seems to me this is pretty settled First Amendment law.
Andrew.
Well, in my prepared testimony, I went into more detail in what I alluded to in my oral statement, which is much of the problem here is what we don't know and what we can't find out about. And the incidents that we become aware of are probably only the tip of the iceberg. Transparency, as Professor Balkin says, is a critical element in this, but standing alone, even that's not enough. Nor are marketplace forces sufficient to restrain the kinds of problems that we're talking about. For most Americans, they have limited choices in broadband providers. And the switching costs through early termination fees, through equipment charges, and bundling with other kinds of services, promotional rates that lock them into contract periods, the switching costs are very high. So it is difficult to get a true consumer response in that kind of environment. The last point I would make, again, this is discussed in greater detail in my written statement, is the carriers can't have it both ways. If they want to benefit from the protection that comes from being a dumb terminal that is provided by the 1996 Telecommunications Act, Section 230C, so that they are immune from tort liability for other people's postings and other people's content over the internet. And if they wish to take advantage of the protection of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act from secondary liability for copyright infringement, as long as they take it down when asked, then they cannot turn around and claim to be First Amendment speakers at the same time. They benefit from not being speakers, not being editors, from just passing on content, because that's what they're really doing.
Let me ask a question now of Ruth and Jonathan. I'm just, because you all are providing video over the web, have you had any difficulty either with mobile services or home services ever not having people not being able to access your video programs? Is that a realistic fear going forward?
Well, I'm not the techie in my company, but I have received emails from people that, yeah, they haven't been able to download it quickly enough sometimes, depending on their carrier. And the big fear with that, really, and then we look at it and try to fix it, and the show is also available through a mobile capability. But the fear in that is that I won't be able to reach my audience, and proves that there is a market for my kind of content. So it's really important for me to be able to have direct access to an audience, and for their ability to be able to download the show. I mean, you know, they are paying, the consumer's already paying for a certain level of speed to download. So, you know, ISP is already getting paid in that sense. But my audience's ability to find me is just important to my business, because that way I can improve my market.
For us, it's the fear is competition and being completely locked out, because the telecom industry, they own Hulu and they own Fancast. Now we're talking about prioritizing content. Whose content should be viewed quicker versus someone else's, which is an unfair competitive advantage. Now, when we start to talk to individuals about quality of content, now we have to talk about, okay, if you're on Comcast, please forgive us, which puts us in a great disadvantage and completely locks us out of the marketplace. And now the competitive advantage becomes they aren't as good as we are. Now we're locking out individuals. We can't compete. We're talking about loss of advertising revenue. We're talking about loss of viewerships. We're talking about basically going out of business. So, if you'll forgive me, the academic in me, let me push back on that a little bit. And this can be for all four of you plus Glenn, who are out there actually producing. You know, Michelle, Garland, Ruth, Jonathan, and Glenn. So these companies have spent a lot of money to develop these very fast systems, right? They've got a heavy investment, and they say, well, look, we just want to be able to charge. We'll charge a non-discriminatory rate. It'll just be a non-discriminatory significant fee if you want to get high quality of service, and then anybody who wants to can pay that fee and then get access to the higher quality of service. So on its face, that seems like that's a fair neutral position. Yeah,
right?
but now it's a gatekeeper mentality. Now you're deciding who and what has become what's quality. Now you're separating the individual and access, and it's all based on capital. Now we're talking about discriminatory access, and you're creating an unfair advantage. Yes, I understand the tiered system, but the tiered system is nothing more than a barrier. It's a barrier between access and freedom of expression.
I think Garland and Michelle want to jump in on Garland and Michelle.
Yes, I think that's problematic, because the historical analogy, I'm not a lawyer, as my distinguished panelists are, but that's a poll tax. It's essentially it's introducing a barrier that it is thought to be or described as non-discriminatory, but it is discriminatory because it prevents folks who do not have access to resources to pay that fee the ability to create content. And if the purpose, or if one of the planned goals of an open internet is to facilitate mass participation, or as close to full participation as possible in the democratic process, in democratic and civil engagement and discourse, we need to remove any barriers, whether they are designed and thought to be discriminatory or in effect are, which is what this sort of poll tax or this notion of a tier system would end up being.
Michelle?
Yeah, basically, since we're a grassroots organization, a lot of our state chairmen would have to pay, everybody has their own website. We help them with with their website, but they wouldn't be able to afford this, and it would really leave out so many grassroots organization like ours. So I totally agree with all three of you. It would just really hinder our ability to survive as a grassroots organization. And a lot of our state chairmen, too, are small business people, which all have websites, which would really hinder their abilities to have their business online that so many people survive on.
We're already paying. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, at startups, we don't have a lot of funds, that's in our definition, so we're already paying to put our video up for a certain amount of bandwidth, and then the consumer's already paying, so we're already paying for that freeway of communication that's been built, so I don't know what more they're asking us to pay.
Glenn, I can't see. Is there something you wanted to add in here? Hearing nothing. All right, let me jump to a question from the internet, which actually is probably best put to Glenn and to Andrew Schwartzman. Many advocates of the regulation proposed in the notice of proposed rulemaking claim that it's necessary to regulate internet service providers so as to preserve democratic engagement and free speech. However, the proposed regulations, unlike the original four principles, do not cover content providers, even those such as search engines, which have effectively become gatekeepers. Should the regulations include such providers? Glenn, are you there? You can take that first if you want. Hearing nothing. Andrew?
The short answer is no. They are not functioning as carriers of other people's content. There is complete open entry in an unregulated market. They have not benefited from access to public rights of way or other kinds of benefits that come as being carriers. So people on the edge are not properly subject to the kind of regulation we're talking about here. This is for conduits.
Bobby, it looks like Bob and Jack want to jump in. Bob?
Yeah, if I could just respond to that. Andy, I am glad to hear you draw the line somewhere. You might be willing to say that neutrality regulation shouldn't extend to search engines, but you're not in agreement with everybody. I mean, one academic testified before Congress that we should have a federal search commission, much like the Federal Communications Commission, because of the importance and the dominance of some search engines out there. It's the kind of regulatory mission creep that I think is likely to occur if you adopt network neutrality regulations, and also the kind that we've seen in the past with other efforts to maintain and to create, from a regulatory standpoint, some kind of public participation. I mean, consider the example of public educational and governmental access channels on cable television. They were created as and mandated as part of the 1984 Cable Act, and then expanded in the 92 Act. And then in 1996, there was a requirement that if cable operators were to allow indecent communication on access channels, they had to block and segregate that speech to another part of to their channels. Again, it's an example of where something was created for one purpose, from a regulatory standpoint, to serve democratic principles, but then was used for regulatory principles, for a regulatory purpose in another way. And it's the kind of thing that we've seen again and again. Even an organization like ICANN, which simply comes up with or manages the domain name system, is susceptible to this as well. In 2005, it was on the cusp of approving a .xxx domain to be used as another voluntary measure for people to be able to filter adult content from the web if they wanted to. But before the contract could be finalized with ICANN, the White House, barraged with emails that this would put a stamp of approval on adult material, put pressure on the Commerce Department, who in fact even threatened ICANN with withholding access to the root server if .xxx were approved. And so again, the neutral principles of the domain name system were compromised, because once you exert political control over these mechanisms, you distort what you are trying to protect.
Jack?
Well, I'm sympathetic to making a distinction between businesses that aren't conduits and businesses that are conduits, between businesses whose major job is traffic for people and businesses who basically are producing their own content and shipping it out. I'm a little puzzled, though, at the argument Bob seems to be making. The argument that Bob seems to be making is that if you have any regulation, it will turn into regulation on an unrelated area. I don't think that's true. Now, I'm going to be with him on the idea of fighting the expansion and mission creep of regulation that's designed to serve a valuable public interest and then is used for other purposes. So he and I will be on the same side of that. But it doesn't strike me that the examples he gave are examples of how a network neutrality rule would be misused. They're examples of additional regulations that he and I might both be opposed to that I think it presents a different problem. I think, for example, the search engine problem. I think you and I would both agree that the problem that search engines pose, to the extent they pose any problem, is very, very different than the problem posed by conduits.
Well, let me just address that last point, because I think we've already seen examples of that very kind of mission creep that infects even arguments over broadband and the internet. Andy, you cited Section 230 as an example of where if internet service providers are going to be immunized from private litigation, then they ought to accept the obligations of neutral principles. And yet, if you'll recall, Section 230 was adopted, or at least it was proposed originally, as an alternative to the Communications Decency Act, and Congress, being Congress, decided why not adopt both. And as it turned out, Section 230 has been a valuable insulating factor that has promoted the growth of the internet by allowing people to make choices whether or not to host content or not, and to have a measure of editorial discretion, as well as, to operate as speakers or as conduits. So, I think it's not hard, you don't have to look very far to find examples of where even things that were adopted to protect the open internet are now being used as justifications for extending regulation. And Jack, I do disagree with you. I think inevitably when you exert the jurisdiction, the other regulations inevitably follow.
But you're not opposed to Section 230, are you?
No, not at all.
But that was regulation passed by Congress. Why aren't you opposed to it?
That was a measure that it did two things. It overturned a judicial decision that had imposed liability on someone who was not exerting editorial control, and it also allowed internet service providers to provide a service to their customers of discriminating between content that they consider to be objectionable and not. That is, not all law is regulation. The network neutrality regulations you're talking about are prescriptive rules to give government oversight over how networks are used and in some cases designed. And the impact, I think, is quite different.
So you're telling me Section 230 is not regulation? I'm surprised to hear that.
And on that tantalizing note, I apologize, but I want to respect our audience's patience. It's now 3:01. So with apologies for the other questions that didn't get asked, I want to thank everybody on the panel for a great workshop. Great meeting you.